Namaste and welcome to yet another edition of News 18 Presents Yuva Bharat in association with the IIMUN, the India International Movement to Unite Nations. Its President Rishabh Shah, as always, is with me. And we are taking this conversation forward with Dr. Subramanian Swamy. Dr. Swamy, today we're going to take this forward. Mission 2047, like I say, the next 26 years. What are the opportunities and what are the threats that face us as a nation? We've got Ateeb Imtiaz, Aman Baldia, and also Deepak Narayan joining us, who are all members of IIMUN. So they will be asking the questions to you, and you have to field them. But first, the opening remarks from your end, and then you guys can take the questions forward. Rishabh, over to you after Dr. Swamy's
opening remarks for 15 minutes, right? Well, essentially, it's a very good topic. And in fact, it should be debated in every university because that's the way, other nations, which are developed nations, they're always discussing this about future prospects and what we can do with the present. Now, the two key words in the topic that you've given me is opportunities and the threats. And as far as the opportunities are concerned, we can only talk in terms of our potential and how we realize that potential, how it is retrieved, how it's marshaled. These are some of the things where your strategy, economic strategy, political strategy, international relations strategy, etc., have to be worked out. So that's the first aspect which I'll deal with. And the second aspect, of course, is the threat. The threat could come from a variety of ways. One is if we don't get our act together on the economic policy, then our economy may remain, it has been dropping. It was at one stage very close to China in the first decade of this century. And now we have fallen quite behind. And Corona has made it worse. Actually, Corona is not the reason for our decline in the economy. If you look at the economic data from 2015-16 onwards, it's a steady decline. All the graphs will show you a steady decline. It's all decline not because of natural phenomenon, but because of bad policy. The second thing is the thing we are now suddenly caught up with is the question of the threat would be out of a lack of defense preparedness. So if you are not in now you have to understand what your threats are. Earlier on, the threat was only Pakistan. Then suddenly the Chinese emerged as a threat, and it was supported by our neighboring countries, which used to be friendly to us, but then they became very pro-Chinese. And now, of course, the threat of terror through the Taliban occupying Afghanistan. So maybe it'll grow, I can't say, and we don't know who can be our friends because the Russians are no more the Soviet Union of the past. They are a country which is totally dependent for finance to the Chinese, and they are in heavy debt. And people, scholarly officials like Vijay Gokhale, who was the foreign secretary, has written a book to say that now we must regard Russia as a junior partner of China. And you saw that here in dealing with the Taliban. Also, the Russians called a conference. They kept India out. And of course, the Americans said, you don't want to be a part. You are not ready to send troops to Afghanistan. Then, well, you are not going to be part of the people who are going to meet with the Taliban in Doha. So the threats are increasing.
Let's open this out. Rishabh, Deepak, Aman, and Ateeb, over to you guys.
Do you really think that, I'm not only talking about the current establishment, but any of the parties which are there in India today have learned from history as well or not? Because a lot of phrases such as oppression of minorities, tweaking of law and order in accordance to the will of the more powerful, bulldozing dissent, something as simple as having names of leaders plastered everywhere. These were things which were negative aspects about history that we read. And these things are yet being heard in different places at different timelines as well. So do you really think that this united front which you're talking about is really possible with the current political environment in India?
Current, obviously not. Is a poisoned atmosphere. But there are some fundamentals you can argue if the other side wants to argue, or you impose it if they don't want to argue it, and the public gives you the mandate for it. And that is, our DNA is the same. That means, and that is, the Journal of Genetics of the University of Cambridge or the University of Houston or Mysore University, they all have done studies, and they said, yes, Indians are of one genetic, by the DNA as it's called. Now, but we have been taught by books written by historians and their tutors and their tutees, so to speak, for Indians, that we are originally were a Dravidian country, and then the Aryans came from Khyber Pass and butchered them and drove them to the south. And so we are Aryans and Dravidians. Now that there is no support for this whatsoever in any of our historical facts or scientific facts and so on. So consequently, we have to correct that history, and not by just saying by a fatwa or by an ordinance or something, but by arguing this matter in the beginning. I'm ready to debate with anybody. I only went once to the JNU to argue this, and they lost so badly they never invited me again. The question basically is this, that at no stage the Indians, when the chips are down, have not united. And this is what Deng Xiaoping said. He said, I asked them about 1962, that you came down the mountains, you had the Tezpur near your hand, and then suddenly you decided to return. What made you do that? So he said, well, we never thought that the Indians would rise unitedly in the way they did. You are all too young to know, but I know that women used to take their gold bangles, their Mangal Sutra, and put it in a basket which was circulated in a public meeting, so that they could buy aeroplanes, they could buy helicopters. People used to shout, how much does a helicopter cost? And somebody would say that. I mean, this is something you have to witness. It has happened in 1971, it's happened in 65. The latent nationalism and oneness comes up when we are in crisis.
Ateep.
Yeah, so the idea of India is that India believes in unity, sovereignty, and secularism. So my question is, when all the parts of country have the same law, then why do the Kashmiri people have PSA and AFSPA? So why
Kashmiri people have what?
AFSPA, Armed Forces Special Powers Act and Public Safety Act. If the government abrogated Article 370 and tried to fill in the gap that is between the center and the Kashmiri people, then why are there these acts still now?
Well, we did it with Tamil Nadu also once.
Then why haven't
they wanted separation? They wanted to separate.
The government really wants to?
I myself was a minister at that time. I dismissed the DMK government. People said rivers of blood will flow, this will happen, that will happen. Nothing happened.
Then
and when the elections were held, out of 234 seats, DMK got only 2 seats.
Why are 16-year-olds being slapped by the PSA, by this draconian law?
No, the draconian law can be modified, and all those I can have a debate with. But nobody debates with me. Farooq Abdullah is an extremely good friend, but when he meets me, he says, oh, come on now, don't talk about all that. There's no legal way you can be separate, because the instrument of accession is common to all the 500 kingdoms that merged with India.
No one said. I'm talking about the PSA and AFSPA, that if the government
talking about?
So he's talking about AFSPA. He's saying that AFSPA and PSA, these two acts.
Correct. Well, those are not introduced by us, by the way. We have just continued it. But it
can be revoked. Article 370 has been revoked to integrate Kashmir with India. So these two acts.
No, I agree with you. It should be integrated, and it can be integrated.
It will go one by one. It will go step by step. It took 74 years. It took 40 years rather than 4 to take away 370. And a collective will of the parliament had to come into place when there was a majority, despite a decision taken in 1964. So this is just about 2 years, of which 18 months has been COVID-19. So have some patience. Even that will go. It is for the first time in 74 years that in 23,000 schools in Jammu and Kashmir, the national anthem has been sung and the national flag has been unfurled. So you should have turned around and said, for the first 20 years of your life, why was this not being done? So when that question is asked, you ask that question first and not about PSA and ASPA, then automatically ASPA and PSA will also go. That's all I'll have to say. We've got limited time, so let me get in Deepak Narayan so that we don't have a spillover. Yes, Deepak, go ahead.
We have put ASPA.
Ask the right questions too. So that's what I'll say, Atif. Yes, Deepak.
Yeah, okay.
Sir.
Namaskaram, sir. My question to you comes from a rather confused space, to be very honest, where I, as a 19-year-old, consider my social media platforms like Instagram or Twitter, irrespective of the very, very little following I have, to be sort of my voice, my platform. It enables me and empowers me to put out my views into the world. But when I see the current establishment sort of going beyond their duty to ensure national and citizen security, which I agree is their duty on these virtual platforms. But when I see them going beyond into moral policing or censoring people for just sharing their views on a public platform, it concerns me as to whether whether my voice is valid as I grow up into becoming a fully functioning member of Indian society. So I want to ask you if the current establishment considers the virtual space something where the right to freedom and speech and expression is valid, and if they don't, I want to know why.
Well, first of all, I'm considered a rebel in BJP, you know that. I'm the only one who's criticizing the Prime Minister on all the policies. I say he has failed in the economy, he has failed in national security. All this I'm to you. I don't know whether you follow me at all. Otherwise, you just follow me and see how much critical I am. And second, I fought the emergency the way nobody else fought. And that time, the same thing happened much worse terms, but that, that's a difference of degree. So for me, I do feel pained, and I do challenge the government in court also. I am waiting to challenge the government on what they did on that podcast or whatever the Israelis did for us. Pegasus. And I'm just waiting for the Israelis to confirm that Mr. X and Mr. Y signed the agreement. And then I'll go. Otherwise, I can't go on a fishing expedition. So I think, you see, dissent is something that should be respected. In before World War II began, Hitler was in the rise, and Britain was headed by a prime minister called Chamberlain, who believed that we should have accommodation with him, and so he went on yielding. Okay, you want Czechoslovakia, take Czechoslovakia. Like that, he allowed Hitler to whet his appetite. There was one man he was in the cabinet, but he was considered a rebel, and that is Churchill. He went on hammering. Nobody said you're disloyal to Chamberlain, you're a rebel. Look at the kind of things that come out from Modi Bhaktas in my Twitter, saying that you are about to go to Congress, you are like Yashwant Sinha, you are like Jetmalani, all kinds of abuses. And I have not said a word personally against Modi. I've just said he does know economics. He said one day that in 5 years I will double the GDP to $5 trillion. And I sent him the calculation to show it will mean 14.8% per year. When I said, when you are not even getting 4% in the country, how can you make it 14.8%? Please tell me. Similarly, the other day he said A plus B whole square is equal to A square plus B square. Where this 2AB came from? Now, I mean, I criticize him for that, and they all get very angry. In fact, they say, no, it is A plus B whole square, it is A plus square plus B square. I don't know, you must know that much algebra. It's not so. So I would say, please don't say that this is all BJP versus them. There are people, and the fact is that Jetmalani, Arun Shourie, X, Y, Z, all were expelled, but I am not expelled, because there is a huge support in my party for what I'm saying. And therefore, he and Amit Shah are not able to get that particular thing. So anyway, I don't want to go into, but I will say this, we have been through much worse than what is happening today. the state of emergency. We fought it, overthrew her. And if BJP also goes in that direction, it is in that direction, but it's not reached anywhere. If it does, we have courts today. The courts are giving us firing every day. There were no courts in the emergency. In fact, the Attorney General came to the court and said you can take the life of somebody without giving him an opportunity to defend himself. And there was a uproar in the whole world that how can you say something like that? So we have been through all this, and we are a democracy. We have survived as a democracy. And if you think that we are going to, as a BJP, cross those limits, I can tell you that next election, public will defeat us like they defeated us in Bengal.
But have they really crossed those limits is a question that we need to
about-
ask, because the fact is new media was not there at that time. When you have new media, you need to have guidelines that will also control media, because your freedom of expression stops where my nose begins. So what you feel is your freedom could be also impinging upon my freedom. So if you have to set rules and guidelines for a medium which is new, a platform which is never before, then that has to be done. And that is something which this government actually delayed. Many actually fault this government and fault the previous government also for not understanding the impact that social media would have, and the fact that these platforms would start engaging and also colonizing us via data. So that's a different matter altogether. But yes, respect for individual freedom is paramount. And I think today we've got far more avenues to ensure that it is upheld than it was in the past, where at least we don't have a situation where the words secular and socialist are inserted surreptitiously into the constitution without a parliamentary approval, and we still have to bear that. And we are taught that it was actually something which Baba Saheb Bhimrao Ambedkar thought about. At that time, he had rejected these two words of secular and socialist, because we don't need those words.
Constituent Assembly,
Anand,
I got a petition pending in Supreme Court on that. Yeah.
Anand, just quickly on this one issue, we're talking about India of 2047, and I actually wanted to ask Dr. Swami this. I know you have been a strong advocate of reforms on different fields. One of the things that I personally feel is very important is education, because that's the only leveler when it comes to pushing the developing countries to making it to that leap which is called developed nations. And sir, the Kothari Commission was in 64, and since then they've recommended the 6% GDP expenditure on education. But we've seen such successive governments, one after the other. Of course, a few in the past did not and could not do it.
Yes.
But in the last 20 years, sir, also the spend in terms of expenditure has only decreased when it comes to when you compare it to the GDP totals, the GDP spend. So do you think when we talk about India in 2047, that will remain one of the most important components? And do you think the government should pay more emphasis on that?
Well, I have, because of shortage of time, I didn't go into it. I have, in fact, noted that economic growth is accelerated when there is innovation. The Bessemer steel blast furnace in Britain and the locomotive was the one that brought the Industrial Revolution. Then the Americans went into wireless and in telephones and so on, and then later on jet engines and fax machines, and finally the internet. So the Americans are all the time, inventing innovations. So innovations, the capital and labor increasing ultimately ends up with a diminishing return, law of diminishing returns. It increases, but with a smaller and smaller margin. It's only when you bring in innovations that the growth curve jumps from one place to another. So you are not going along the curve, you will be jumping curves and going. So that is the key point, and that only can come if you educate your people, and educate them not by memorizing your lessons, but by independent thinking. So you not only need more money on education, you need more teachers, therefore you have to pay them more, and you have the society has to regard. When I became a professor, people said, "You're mad. Why you become a professor? Go to a company and become a company executive, and you will get 4 times the salary." So these professions have to be given that status which we had originally, and that is the way you can do it. In America, for example, those who do research, they are celebrated, and they are on TV if they have got a prize and so on. And it's the whole society works on. They have science quizzes for young people. So I would say that your point is very well taken. I did want to put it in, but to explain it in detail would have taken time. Without education, which translates it into innovation, you cannot accelerate your growth rate.
Absolutely. Innovation is required, and I think there has to be a huge amount of push, but more importantly, it's the collective effort of us as a nation. And I agree with you, Dr. Swami, when you say we need to come across and define a broad framework that will unite us as a nation in terms of an idea that is India. And because that's going to be important, because everything else then perhaps falls into place as it fills up the entire jigsaw. Dr. Swami, Ateeb, Aman, Deepak Narayan, and also Rishabh, thank you very, very much. We've overshot time, so I'm going to draw the curtains on this effort right now. But look forward to Dr. Swami joining us again for many more engaging conversations like this. Thank you very, very much.